Welcome to the Laredo Public Library's NASA at My Library STEM Career Series. My name is Ana Lisa Perez Gomez, librarian and branch manager at the McKendrick Ochoa Salinas Branch Library. Following our summer theme, Imagine Your Story, which inspired all of us to use our creative muscles to imagine fictional worlds, we ask you to continue using your imagination to build a future for yourself. Each session in the series will feature someone who has a fun, exciting, and challenging career in the science, technology, engineering, or mathematics fields. I'd like to thank Dr. Michelle Barron for being with us today. She is the top infectious disease expert in Colorado. Dr. Shelley, as she is affectionately known, will be interviewed by librarian Danielle Burns. During the interview, please remain on mute. Feel free to post your questions in the chat box and we'll address those towards the end of the hour. Also, if you are a teen volunteer accruing community service hours, please type your full name in the chat box for attendance purposes. We hope you enjoy the session. And now, Danielle, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Barron. Is it okay if I call you Dr. Shelley too?
Oh yeah, of course, perfect. Absolutely. Most people call me by my name normally, not doctor, so it's all good.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we're so glad you're here, and it's so great to see a face from Laredo who has just taken over by storm this pandemic and the studies of infectious diseases. And so we're really, really proud, and we're Laredo proud especially to see you doing so well and so excellently.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here.
I know this probably is changing due to the pandemic, but I want to ask, what's a typical day like at work for you?
Even without a pandemic, I can't say I have a typical day. It all kind of just depends on what comes at me. So my role at the hospital is I'm what's called the medical director of infection prevention. And so my goal is that whenever somebody comes into the hospital, that they leave the hospital without having an acquired infection from their bloodstream or ulcers or whatever. And so often my day starts with, well, like all our days, email. And then I usually have meetings. Some days I see patients. Some days I'm just in the office. And sometimes I'm on ladders looking at ceilings to make sure there's no mold. Sometimes I'm dealing with floods. And sometimes I'm dealing with pandemics. So it really just kind of depends on the day. And that's kind of what I love about my job, is that there's never sort of a dull day. The day I tell you that, I have nothing to do, is the day I've retired.
Wonderful. So let's go back. If I remember correctly, when you were very young, you had already known that you wanted to be some type of doctor. So what kind of helped you realize that going to Yale was achievable and that becoming a doctor was achievable and not so far off in the distance?
Sure. So both things. Let's start with the doctor. So yeah, I was 4 years old when I told my parents I was going to be a doctor, or a doctor ballerina. I didn't understand you couldn't be both. So I was going to be a ballerina and a doctor, or a doctor and an astronaut. It was always a doctor plus something, and I really don't know why. There were no doctors in my family. And so this wasn't like, everybody's done it, and so I obviously will do it too. And I can't really explain to you why, but it just made sense to me that was probably what I was supposed to do. And then going to college, I knew I was going to go to college. That was something that was prioritized. My parents felt strongly that was a good idea. And somebody from my high school, I went to J.W. Nixon High School, graduated a really long time ago. I'm not going to tell you when, because you're going to know how vieja I really am. And somebody from my high school went to Yale, and he came back and said, it's really great. It's really fun. I really like it. You'd get good grades. You're pretty smart. Maybe you should think about it. And so I talked to my parents about it and just said, I want to go to the best school I can go to. And there are other very good schools in Texas, so you don't have to go to Yale, but you could go to Yale if you wanted to. And so I said, why not? My mom really was very encouraging, and she always just said, the only way you fail is if you don't try. And so I feel that's kind of the way my life works. Like, if you don't try, then you're never going to know. So what happens? It doesn't work out. Well, then you do something else. But so I applied, I got in, and kind of the rest is history. And then I started volunteering in college at the hospitals because I was on the debate team. I was on the student council. My parents were convinced I was going to be a lawyer. And so they were always kind of like, oh, you know, it's okay. You don't have to be a doctor. Just because you said it when you were 4 doesn't mean that has to be what you want to do. And I just, volunteering in the hospital, it just cemented it. There was no question in my mind. That was what I was supposed to do. So I was fortunate enough to get into medical school, and I just can't imagine doing anything different. Infectious diseases is sort of even another layer of things, but like just being a doctor, there's nothing better I could have ever imagined doing. People you will never ever meet otherwise. People at the best and worst times of their lives, and you're part of that scenario. And again, I just can't tell you, there's nothing more fulfilling.
Excellent. So what, in your opinion, are traits of a successful doctor?
So obviously you have to study a lot. So and this is another thing that my parents have told me, and I agree with it. There's always hard work. People look at people and think, oh my God, they have it so easy. They look like they did it so well. There's always 1,000 hours that have gone into something. Even when you're like the most smartest person in the world, you still got to do a lot of work. And it's on you to do that work, to be able to be better, to be able to continue to like do your job well. And so I think that's number one, is that you just have to, you are going to work hard. And that's okay, because you get paid well, you get a lot of fulfillment from it. There's rewards to that, but anybody that says it's easy is lying to you.
Good to know. So you weren't just sitting and watching Netflix, were you?
I watch a lot of Netflix, but I also study a lot. And so I think that's even in high school. I did well in high school. I certainly studied a lot. And so yeah. I think for you to look, some people are super smart and can just learn everything. I'm not one of those people. I have to look at it. I have to read it. I have to think about it. I have to read it again. I have to memorize it. You have to put in the hours. And the really great book I love, it's called Outliers. And it's Malcolm Gladwell is the author. And it's not that long a book, but it's great because it really gives you some of these examples of people that we look at, like Bill Gates or like Steve Jobs, or like people that are like really smart and like, founded Apple, founded Microsoft. They're genius. But they will, if you look at it, they're super smart, but they put in the hours. Like they're constantly working and playing, and some of it doesn't feel like work if you like what you're doing. But those number of hours that you put in make all the difference. And so even now in my job now, I'm required to do a lot of speaking. I do a lot of teaching. I'm a professor. And people are always like, how are you so comfortable? I said, I was on the debate team for 4 years. 4 years of people staring at me, telling me I needed to do it different, how to do it better, how to change your voice, and also how to argue things. And so, because you don't know which side you're going to be on. And so if they're like, oh, you just so naturally do it. I'm like, I might have a little natural talent, but a lot of it was developed. I was in the debate team in college. So we're talking 6 years of my life of constant training. And look at athletes. Sure, again, they're good, but they don't get good. They're not just, they get good, they get better, and then they get amazing because they practice and do it again and push themselves. And so I think whatever you do, that's an important thing to think about, is that it may look easy. It's probably for some easier, but they all put in the work. All your major athletes, all your people that are successful, you got to put in the work. And it's okay, because sometimes work doesn't really feel like work if you like what you're doing.
Absolutely. That's the beautiful part of it. If you love what you do, it makes it so much more pleasurable, so much more enjoyable.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like you were really, when you went to Yale, you got really involved. So I was wondering, did you experience any culture shock when you went all the way up north? Because the climate is a heck of a lot different. I'm from Buffalo, so I know the weather is a big difference. So I wanted to ask, could you speak a little bit more on how you adjusted? How was the culture shock? What helped you cope through it? And what advice would you have for students that are Laredoans that end up going out of town, even if it's just to Dallas?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I think the hardest thing from a culture standpoint is recognizing that you're not living with your parents anymore. And on one level, that seems really cool. You're like, yay, I can do whatever I want. And then you're like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. And so it's like, even doing your laundry seems like this major thing. And my mother, I would call my mother like 1,000 times. And I'm like, Mom, I need to do laundry. And she's like, uh-huh. Like, you know how to do laundry. And she's like, why are you having trouble with this? And so I think, and that was pre-cell phones. I know. Can you even imagine that we didn't have cell phones back then? And so, yeah, so there was a lot of, I think, just a lot of homesickness. I think what helped a lot, Yale's actually really small. And so it's a small undergraduate, only has less than 5,000 people. And so they sort of set you up to have interactions with people to help support you. There's a lot of resources within our dorms. We call them residential colleges. Again, just realizing there are going to be people from different backgrounds. And there are just so many different activities and different options, cultural and otherwise. And so there was the Latin American group, which certainly helped because everybody's like, oh, I need arroz con pollo. And you could go to the center and have arroz con pollo, and it's really fun, or speak Spanish, or, for all the different backgrounds. Or you could just explore and say, I've never had Ethiopian food. I'm going to go to the, African American Studies house today and try it out and see what it tastes like. And so I think there was a lot of beautiful things there. All colleges have different things. These are things you should ask about, like what resources are there, what activities are there. And at the end of the day, I think the key is to just having family support. Like, I don't know, my grandparents, they'd send me care packages. They just, and little things, like my grandmother sent me a blanket that she had crocheted, knew I was going to be cold. My cousins would bake me cookies and send them to me. And so just little things like that just made me feel happy. Like, okay, they miss me and I'm still loved by somebody, which is good, right? We all need that.
And from what you were telling us, you weren't the only Laredoan at Yale, were you?
No. So my year, there were 4 of us. So all of us graduated the same year. I went to Nixon, 2 of them went to Martin, and 1 of them went to San Agustin. So all 4 of us were there, and 3 of us all went to medical school at the same medical school. So 3 of us are all doctors. One of them practices, I'm in Colorado. Aurora Gonzalez is in Houston, and she's an OBGYN, so she delivers babies. And Carlos Perez is a radiologist, I think, in Dallas. So 3 Laredoans, all of us from different schools, all went to Yale and then all went to medical school.
That's excellent. So it's good to know that it's not that far away, that it is achievable. And so don't ever think that you can't make it. And you're such a wonderful example, Dr. Shelley, for that.
Yeah, and I think that's why I was so happy to do this, because somebody did it for me. Like, they showed up and said, yeah, I went to Yale, I'm from Laredo, I went to Nixon, you can do this. And I think sometimes that's, as I told, the only failure I think you have is when you don't try.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this is just kind of a funny question here. Annalisa, let me know if I'm running over on time. Feel free.
Okay, you're just fine. We do have a couple of questions in the chat box. So whenever you guys have a little break, we'll go ahead and address those. Okay?
Okay, sure. So let me go ahead and ask, Dr. Shelley, do you have a personal motto? And if you did, what would it be? I probably could have prepped you for that question beforehand. Huh?
I think I kind of gave it to you. The only failure is not trying.
Yes. Yes,
and I would
absolutely.
say, even in my quote failures, I still learn something, always. And so my mom was very sort of philosophical from a young age, where she would just say, okay, you didn't get what you wanted, so can you do it differently next time? If you can't, move on. And so I'd say that's probably my other philosophy of, like, accept what you know. If you can change it, great. If you can't, move on, do something else. And it doesn't mean, so I think it's sort of the don't ever give up on things. If you really want something, you can do it. It just may take a little, not everybody takes the direct path. Sometimes you got to have some little inroads or curveballs to make you better.
Absolutely. Okay, Annalisa, do you want to turn to some of the questions then? Because I do see we have a lot of questions coming in.
We're getting a couple of questions in, so I think it'd be a great time to address some of them. I'm actually going to be calling on Gianni to unmute herself because she would like to ask you a few questions. Gianni?
Hey.
Hi, my name is Jenny Cisneros. My first question is, how was the application process for Yale? Were you stressed out? Did you have any doubts, second thoughts on it?
I mean, applying to college, I think, can be a little stressful just in general. Getting all the forms, writing all the essays, getting your letters of recommendation. So I don't know that applying to Yale was any different. I applied to Yale, Harvard, Stanford, UT, A&M, Baylor. I mean, I was all over the map in terms of like, I got waitlisted at Harvard. I got into Yale. I got into Stanford. I got into A&M. Got into Baylor. So it was worth all the effort, but I would say all of it was a little stressful, and certainly this was a long time ago. So the way we didn't have computers, and you all laugh at me, but it's true. There was no internet, there was no cell phone. So the way I applied was the old-fashioned way. I wrote it out and I mailed it with a stamp. So it's a little different now than the way you guys would do.
Also, what did it feel like moving away from home? Did you have any trouble adjusting, or were you so busy with school?
Yeah, so I think being away from home is hard. I was homesick. I'd say it took me probably a couple of months before I felt like I was very excited too. Like, it was really cool, like going to all these classes and meeting all these people. So there was always kind of the back and forth of sort of missing my mom, missing my siblings, sort of missing my comfort zone, but then there was all these such cool things going on that sort of, I'd say after probably a couple of months, my mom joked, she said my phone bill, or her phone bill, because I call her Collect, again, no cell phones, and they didn't have unlimited plans, and she said her phone bill started to go down, and then she knew I was doing okay, because she's like, you stopped calling me, I have to call you now.
One last question. Are people from Yale different from Laredo?
They're different in that they have potentially different experiences. So my roommates were from New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. And I was from Texas and from Laredo. And so where they grew up was obviously very different than where I grew up. But that was kind of, at the end of the day, they're just people just like you. And, some people you like, some people don't like, some people you're like, oh my God, we're going to be friends forever. And some people you're like, well, they're nice, but you just don't have a lot in common. And so I'd say what the really cool part was, you got to meet people from all over the world. Yale's international. So they have people from every single state in the United States, and then many different countries from abroad. And so that was just so cool, because you could just talk to people about their lives and their experiences. And part of what I like being about a doctor is that you get to hear those stories, and you get to, and it's meaningful. And for me, that's the biggest part. I just like hearing people's stories. Like, I want to know where you came from. I want to know what you did and who you are as a person. So for me, that was always a plus.
Thank you.
Of course.
And we also have the Gonzalez family. They have a couple of questions that they want to ask you.
Sure.
I wanted to know, how can we prevent zoonotic viruses such as coronavirus from happening again in the future?
No way to prevent it. It's the way it works. If you actually look at history, this is normal. We have these viruses that'll sort of come up and evolve and change, and they've been around for millions of years. We have, as humans, have not been here that long, and so they have the upper hand, and so there's really no way to prevent them. The only way we can do is just sort of figure out how to manage them better. But, we're actually, I'm not trying to scare you, but we're due for pandemic flu. Look, historically, every 10 to 12 years, we get a new strain of flu. The last flu strain was back in 2009. So guess what? We're not done. And some of it is just the reality of, and new technologies and things may help us feel better with it, but I don't think we'll ever get rid of them.
My mom actually wanted to know, would you ever want to come back to Laredo?
Yeah, so I actually go to Laredo a couple of times a year. My family still lives there. All my family lives in Laredo. My mom's retired. My cousins are there. So I come back and periodically see people and do stuff. But the work I'm doing right now is, I'm at a university, and so it's just very specific to what I'm doing. So if there were opportunities, maybe, but I actually love living in Colorado and sort of been here 20 years. So it's kind of hard to leave my institution. And certainly right now, there's sort of I'm in the middle of just a little pandemic, maybe.
Okay, and Valentina just posted some questions. Valentina, do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi, thank you. I have a question about what environments did you encounter when you became a doctor, and was it what you imagined it was going to be? And also during this pandemic, how are you approaching telling people, like sharing information, helpful information, so people get protected and avoid getting sick?
Both really great questions. And so I had kind of an idea what it would be like to be a doctor because I volunteered at the hospital. Now, obviously, I wasn't doing the work. I was sort of mainly hanging out with people and talking to them. But in college, I also volunteered on a burn unit, and I helped them change some of the dressings and went to the surgeries. And so I kind of had a sense of it. When I started medical school, when you start actually getting into the nitty-gritty of it, there were things obviously that I had never done or never seen or couldn't even imagine. And so I think there were definitely things that I was not ready for. But guess what? Everybody else you're with also has never done that before. And so you have that experience, that shared experience that really bonds you, where these people that you go to school with become the best friends of your life because you all went through the same thing at the same time, and all are like, oh my God, did you hear that? Did you see that? And I'd say that medicine continues to do that. And that's kind of the fun of it, is that, as I said, my day is never boring. There's always something I haven't seen or I haven't thought about. And that's what makes it fun, because I'm always having to rethink and think again. And it's kind of, again, I love it. Your second question was, forgive me, what was the second question?
How are you approaching the current pandemic?
Yes. So I do a lot of media, actually. So I do a lot of, everybody sort of jokes about at my hospital that I'm the local television star, because I do a lot of news report. If you Google me, you'll actually find I've done a lot of stuff. I've done Facebook Live, I did Reddit, I do a lot of television interviews, I do print interviews. A lot of it is intended with the idea of getting education out there at a way people can understand, because I think there's so much stuff out there, and it's like, great. Yeah, somebody just put Reddit. I didn't ask me anything. I have actually done an AMA on Reddit, which was kind of fun. And so, which I didn't know what it was before, by the way. So again, I'm old. So I do a lot of the external stuff, and then internal, I teach the medical students, I teach the nursing students, I do a lot of classwork work with the students on pharmacy, nursing, all of them, to be able to make sure that they're getting the information that's correct and that allows them to make decisions, because information is power. Having good information, having the right information helps you figure out what you can do or not do. That makes sense. And I think that's really important.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So those are all the questions we have right now. Danielle, you want to go back to your list?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you mind if I ask you another funny one?
Yeah, of course.
You might not expect this one, but tell me 3 pet peeves you have.
3 pet peeves. Lights being left on.
Oh,
Don't
yeah.
ask me why. It just makes me crazy. I'm always turning the lights off in my house. My husband gets mad because he said I turn off the lights when he's in the room sometimes and I forget. Someone not being direct. You just got to tell me the truth. You may not be pretty, but you got to tell me. If you don't tell me, that's a pet peeve. Don't sort of, just tell me. I'm a big girl. Tell me I can handle the truth. And probably my third pet peeve is dishes in the sink. I can't handle having dishes in the sink. Even one makes me crazy.
Well, thank you for sharing those. So I know being a doctor and having studied infectious diseases, could you tell us a little bit about your coursework? Did you have favorite classes, least favorite classes? What were some of those favorite courses that you took or those things that you studied that you just absolutely loved in college?
I loved biology. I thought biology was the coolest thing ever. Just how the body works, how animals work, how the environment works. I mean, biology I just thought was the coolest thing ever. Immunology specifically is how I ended up in infectious diseases. Your immune system is like a really highly trained army, and it has all these cool things it can do, most of the time to protect you. Sometimes when it doesn't, just like when you have an army, sometimes there's friendly fire and there can be bad outcomes. And that's really what excited me, trying to understand how all that came about. And that's kind of how I ended up in infectious diseases, because I was so interested in like understanding how is it that my immune system keeps me whole, but if there's a little like one little copying error, and now I get all these weird infections from things that normally live in the grass or in the trees and or birds, and suddenly I'm really sick from that. And how do you fix that, or how do you recognize that? So that kind of is how I ended up in what I do now.
Excellent. So I know you talk about your adjustment to college, but is there an adjustment between college and med school? If so, what was it like, and what were some of the changes? What would students expect as they go into that pre-med track?
It's the intensity level. So college was busy, but I had a lot of fun. Like you study, and I feel like I studied a lot, but I also didn't study a lot. You do other things. You hang out with your friends, kind of like high school. You do fun things sometimes, and that's okay. You got to have that balance. And so I think when you get to medical school, you have so much information that you need to learn in a very short period of time. It's like on rapid fire speed or light speed. Like, the first week, like, you start with biochemistry and some of the basic science classes in medical school. And so I'd taken it in college. So I'm like, oh, I'm good. I've done this. It's like the first week covered my entire class, my whole like 4 months of class. First week. And they're like, okay, remember that? Great. Now we're moving on. And you're just like, oh my God. But again, you got to put in the hours. I'm not somebody who can look at something 1 minute and know it. I just had to study. And so that was probably the biggest adjustment, was just trying to figure out, like, how do I do this in the time that I have and still keep up? And so you have to learn how to do that. And that takes some time. And luckily, again, had friends who helped me, and we formed study groups and sit there and quiz each other. And a lot of that is just figuring out how you learn, and how some people just need to read it and they're done. Some people have to see it. Some people have to talk about it. There's so many different ways to do this. So you've got to figure that out. So that took me a little while, because it was such a different way of learning. I was used to like small classes, a lot of discussion, a lot of essays. This was all, okay, memorize the facts, move on, take the next test. And so it was very different.
So after the pre-med school, or the med school, I apologize. So once you move from pre-med into med, what happens? Do you get to be a doctor after you finish med school? What's the process afterwards?
Yeah, so when you finish, the day you graduate, you are officially a doctor. And I can tell you, that was the most exciting day of my entire life, just because I'd wanted it all my life. And so to be sitting in that seat, and they said, Dr. Michelle, then I was just like, they're really calling me, like, this is really happening. So you're officially a doctor at that point, but then you do training. So the first year of your training is called an internship. And then the years after that, we call them your residency. And the number you do, the number of years that is, depends on what you're doing. And so I did internal medicine. So I did 3 years of training, and literally every day, all days, you see patients in the hospital, in the clinic, usually in different sort of specialties. They teach you how to like apply all this stuff that you learn and how to like be a real doctor, even though you're a doctor, you're sort of a student. You're still a doctor in training at that point. After that, in internal medicine, you can then do subspecialties. So infectious diseases is a subspecialty of internal medicine. Cardiology, which is a heart doctor, or you could be a nephrologist, which is a kidney doctor. There's all these subspecialties that you can do. Most of those are 3 more years. So this is, again, somebody's like, oh, well, you just do it. That wasn't that long. I'm like, do you know how long I've been in school? 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, and 6 years of training. And then I officially could then just do what I wanted to do. But every day you keep up that learning and training, so it's never static.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think 6 years is a lot more than we were expecting for that training to take place.
But it's what you need, because there's just so much to learn.
Yeah,
and if you don't have that good foundation, then you're going to constantly, you just won't do a good job.
Yeah, excellent. I see that the Gonzalez family has some questions. Do we want to go and let them take the mic for a minute?
Absolutely. Gonzalez family?
I'll say it all. Okay, I guess. Sorry. How do you feel about a COVID-19 vaccine taking only a couple of years, like from what I heard, compared to other vaccines and medicine taking years and years to test and come out?
Yeah, so I think it's actually pretty cool that we can. I think it tells you again how much better technology is than it was before. And some of this is commitment, right? We could probably get all vaccines done in this time frame if you gave me $10 billion, and then we could probably figure it out. But most of the time we don't have the money, or we don't have the investment. And so I think obviously with this being a global crisis and the impact that it's having on people, on the economy, I think that's why everybody's like, here, get all the smart people in a room. Here's all the money you can ever need. Go for it. And so I think it's pretty cool that we are able to leverage that. I think, times of crisis is when innovation often occurs, because people have to think outside the box. And so it's scary on some level, but it's also how we get better and how we do things differently. And the fact that we're having this meeting right now over Zoom speaks to that. I mean, this technology is not new, but nobody was using it. And now I was telling them earlier that this is my day every day. I have at least one Zoom meeting a day. And it's kind of cool because I'm in Colorado, you all are in Laredo, and yet we're all together. So who would have thought, right?
Thank you. And this is John's mom. I wanted to know how you felt about the trial for the vaccine being done, like I don't know if it's the 3rd or 4th phase of the vaccine being done here in Laredo in your hometown.
Oh, I didn't know that it's being done there. We have a site here, and I'm so excited. I think that's amazing. I think the more diverse our populations that get it, the better. You really want to make sure that it works in men, it works in women, that it works in all different ethnic types, people that are tall, people that are short, all these things. I think it's great. And so the fact that Laredo got picked as a site is amazing.
And awesome. Thank you. And I have another question, just because this has been coming up in a lot of parent groups. I personally think masks are a good thing here. But a lot of people that I know are having a really hard time with wanting to put a mask on. And especially in their little kids, sending their little kids to a kindergartner wearing a mask all day in school. Do you have anything that I can say to those parents or maybe you agree with them? But how do you feel about that?
No, I have a stack of masks. No, you can't be an infectious disease doctor and not do this. My first rule of thumb is I'm supposed to do no harm. That's the oath I took when I became a doctor. And so by doing no harm, that means I am not going to give it to anybody else. And so in my mind, that's the number one reason to wear a mask, is because and even if I wash my hands and I don't touch my face, I don't want to make you sick. And so for people that have been reticent to wearing masks, that's what I ask them. I said, do you want to get somebody sick? They're like, but I'm not sick. I said, you just don't know you're not sick. That's the problem, is that you could be doing this. I said, do you really want to get abuelo sick? I said, or your prima or anybody? I said, no. And so this is the only way, and there's good data now. I will say at the beginning, the data was kind of soft, and I was sort of on the fence about like, it doesn't hurt, but maybe it's not going to really work. But I think the data is really compelling. Good published data. Data that's just crap. Sorry, that's just sort of the reality. But so wearing masks really make a difference. And so, fine, do what you want with you, but don't make everybody else in this classroom, in my family, or otherwise potentially get sick because you are being silly about things. Finding a mask that fits well is obviously important. Make sure that it feels good. And then so much fun stuff now. You can decorate them. You can make your own. And the goal is to really contain anybody that you've talked to. Everybody at one point, a little bit of that little spit comes out sometimes. That's what you're trying to keep inside, is that the mask keeps that spit that could have the virus from coming into contact with other people.
I just wanted to address Camden's comment. He is really good at challenging things that people say. He always wants to make sure that it's based on fact and evidence. And he did post something. He put, don't ingest Clorox. It won't heal COVID. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. What would you suggest for people who hear these different things? How should they make sure that it's correct information?
So the Centers for Disease Control has a fabulous website, cdc.gov, cdc.gov. Their information is at all levels. There's a section for healthcare professionals, and then there's the section for everybody else. And so the section for everybody else has information that's at the appropriate level where if you're not a doctor, you can read it and still understand. And the World Health Organization is the other one that, again, has really good, strong information that breaks down the data and the evidence that's been put out there in ways that make sense for people that are not necessarily medical. And so I always ask people when they're like, and I read it on the internet. And I'm like, at what site did you read it on? Like, there's so much bad information out there. Make sure that when you're looking at things, look at a source. And if it doesn't sound true, it probably isn't. I think we learned that when we were young.
Okay, those are all the questions we have right now, Danielle.
Perfect. Okay. So, I know you've mentioned you'd said some words in Spanish, and obviously that's the beauty of being bilingual and being from Laredo. So can you speak a little bit about being bilingual and being a doctor, and does that benefit your job, or are there other unexpected benefits to being bilingual?
So obviously, even in Colorado, we have a lot of Latinos. And so people come and some speak English, some don't speak good English. And not being able to communicate when you're not feeling well, really hard. I mean, imagine that you're feeling sick and everybody's staring at you and all you see is somebody's mouth moving and you don't understand a thing they're saying. It's really scary. And then culturally too, just having that context, like then they feel like, oh, well, Mexicana, then she's going to take care of me better. Now, I may or may not treat you any different, but it gives you that sense of like, okay, I'm part of that community, so I feel safer. Or there's just that sense of trust that maybe makes it a little less scary. And so it's very helpful to be able to speak Spanish and to be able to take my own history. Certainly, I take care of patients who don't speak Spanish and still have other languages. And again, technology. We now have iPads that have the ability to FaceTime interpreters. So the interpreters speak their whatever language it is, and there's all sorts of any language they can come up. And so the same thing. The person then sees someone that looks like them and speaks their language. And now it's like having a third person in the room that can help understand what's going on and really figure out the complaints and really help them get through whatever it is. Because I'm only as good as the information you give me. Now I can do exams and I can do tests, but really at the end of the day, the story you tell me about your headache or your whatever it is that you came in helps me figure out how I can treat you or what I need to do to get you better.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to give you a sentence and I'd like you to go ahead and finish this for me. On Sunday mornings, you can usually find me doing
Drinking coffee on my patio with my dog.
Wonderful. Okay, so is there any part, especially coming from the college standpoint and the course standpoint, was there a course that you didn't enjoy, that you found out that I just don't like studying this? Did you ever find that experience during college?
Chemistry.
Oh, chemistry.
I like the potion part, but I don't like memorizing all the equations of how to do it. Not that exciting to me. The fun part was the lab. The lab was a blast, but the rest of it, I wasn't so excited. But you had to take it, so it's kind of just what it is.
If you don't mind, I'm going to jump in here just because I've had a lot of people kind of tell me, should I take the easy class or should I take the hard class? I might fail if I take the hard class. What is your advice on that?
It's all about balance, right? So I think you want to challenge yourself. And for you to do well in life, you have to keep going after the next thing. You can't just do it because you could do it because it's easy. But I can tell you in my experience, easy gets boring really fast. It's kind of nice, but it doesn't really work for me. So I think you have to sort of balance. And if you really think you're going to do bad, then if you go in with the attitude that, oh, it's going to be hard, and so I'm not going to do well, I'll just do easy, then that's the life you're going to have, where you'll never sort of have that next level. And that's okay. That's for some people, that's probably okay. But I wouldn't let the fear of something keep you from trying. And again, if you think you're not going to do well, then ask yourself, why am I not going to do well? Is it because I don't have enough time? That's a reasonable thing. So be realistic. I don't have time. I have too many other hard classes, so I got to pick one. Or I'm going to have to study, which means I'm not watching Netflix, or I got to be home earlier. I got to get up earlier to do my work. And so in life, you have to find balance. And finding balance is not always easy, but for you to do well in life, you have to figure these things out. And it's unique to you. Like, I am not a morning person. I would rather stay up till 3 a.m. studying than get up at like 5. It would just kill me. And so, but I know that. And so when I know I have a lot of homework or I'm going to have a hard class, then I sort of figure out my schedule so that I can accommodate that a little better. And you have to make choices sometimes, you can't do everything all the time and do it well. And that's okay. Again, it depends on what you're trying to do. Sometimes I will never be a world-class singer, but that's okay. So I don't take classes. I don't do it, but I sing in my car. That's okay.
Did you have to make any sacrifices to attain your dreams?
Of course, we all make sacrifices. You always make choices, Even now, I work a lot. I work a lot of hours. With COVID, I work unbelievable hours. And so, again, you have to sort of figure out, so my dog doesn't get walked sometimes till like midnight because that's when I get home. Now, my husband helps me out, but sometimes I don't see him because I'm working so much. Sometimes I don't call my mom and she gets mad at me. So it's those things that, it's hard. So it's always, again, trying to figure out how to keep things in check. And I think we all do this. We all work or we go to school and we have our families and we have our friends. And I think it's really hard to figure all that out. And that's when you just got to say, okay, I did the best I could today. Tomorrow I'll be a little better.
We have a couple more questions in the chat box. Back to the Gonzalez family. I love that you guys are so curious. Would you like to unmute yourselves again?
Yeah, I wanted to know if you've heard about the bubonic plague coming back. I heard that a teenager in Mongolia died of it, and a squirrel, and I think Colorado has a squirrel.
Colorado has plague. I've taken care of a patient with plague. And so it lives in our prairie dog population. So people think they're really cute. Some people think they're annoying. But we have plague in Colorado. There's plague in New Mexico, parts of Wyoming, California. There's actually everywhere. Transmitted through fleas, and it's a bacteria. So what happens is that it gets onto the animals. It often infects the animals. Sometimes the animals will die. Humans usually get it because they're out hiking or they're messing with the animals or they have pets. So your cat or your dog goes and messes with the animal that's sick, and then they get infected, and then you're messing with your pet, and then you get sick. So it's definitely out there.
Okay, we have another question from Aletsi. Aletsi, could you unmute yourself?
How long did it take to be a doctor?
Oh, I didn't hear you.
She said, how long did it take to become a doctor?
Okay, thank you. So you have to go to college. So some people do college in 3 years. But most people do it in 4. And then medical school is 4 years. So 8 years of school, and then your training. And the training can be anywhere from 3 to 10 years, depending on what you do. If you're going to be a brain surgeon or a heart surgeon, it's sometimes upwards of 10 years before you're finished.
Thank you, Dr. Barron. We have Valentina.
Thank you. What are your thoughts on the use of the mask and people resisting using it and being making riots against using it? And how do you tell people about what's your opinion on it?
So I sort of understand the concept of people wanting to do what they want to do, and they say, okay, this is my body, my face, whatever. But again, like if somebody was smoking next to you and you had breathing problems, you tell them not to smoke, or you would walk away, right? And so that smoker can do whatever they want to themselves, but when it starts affecting other people, then you have to sort of think through, well, how do we deal with this? And so it's not that different in that, again, so I just tell people, do you really want to get other people sick? Like, wouldn't you want to, aren't you, at our heart of hearts, I like to think all of us are good people, and we would never want to hurt somebody else, not intentionally. And so this is sort of the way I look at it and say, right, I may not give, so let's say you and I don't wear our masks, and one of us has it, so I give it to you. And so it's beyond you. Who do you live with? Somebody in your household could then get it. So like I said, your abuela then gets sick, or the baby next door gets sick, and then they end up in the hospital. You really want that on your conscience? That's sort of what I think about. It's like, yeah, you may be fine, but everybody else may not. And we know that the infection rate of this is where one person is sick, you can get 2 or 3 people sick easily. So you just keep multiplying that. You can imagine, like, you can have an entire, and it's horrifying. If you ever, there's some really nice, they're terribly sad too. There's some good podcasts, and they've talked about it. I mean, this devastates families where the mom gets sick, and then the daughter gets sick, and then the cousin gets sick, and a lot of people have died. And so it's devastating to the families because yeah, it's terrible. And I just don't think that they fully appreciate, like, that's a real thing, that happens. And just because you're being stubborn and like, oh, I'm just too cool to wear a mask. Well, yeah, are you so cool that you're okay with somebody dying? Probably not.
Okay, so I have a question from Camden. He's our resident librarian in training. And his question is on the mask topic. Do you get mad when people have their mask down under their nose?
So I don't get mad. I just figure they don't understand. And so I sort of tell them and say, you want to pull it up. Your nose and your mouth is where all the virus is kind of hanging out. So doing this or doing this is just, might as well not be wearing a mask. Kind of not doing anything. So, and sometimes, and there's a way to do that where you can make fun of it. It's like, ooh, I like your nose. Your nose so big it can't go under a mask. And so sometimes you can be silly and still get your point across.
And I believe
It is una boca grande, so we'll cover it up.
The Gonzalez family, do you have another question?
Yeah, I had a question about the ventilators that the COVID patients are being put on. I don't really understand what they do, the ventilators do, but if a person gets on a ventilator, are they able to come off of that alive?
Great question. So let me back up so you understand what a ventilator does. So a ventilator is a machine that basically puts oxygen into your lungs. And it does that by, they put a tube into your mouth that goes into your throat and goes down into your windpipe that connects to your lungs. And so they mix oxygen at different levels, and it also applies pressure. So when the oxygen comes through, it forces it in, so it basically breathes for you. Because for whatever reason you're unable to breathe, or because there's so much inflammation in your lungs that the normal way oxygen gets in there isn't happening. This is the way that happens. So some people, when they go on the ventilator, sometimes can be on that for a long time, but still come on, so they can still at some point be able to breathe on their own and live their life again. Some people don't. And so there's a lot of things that sort of play into that are probably a little more high level than what you probably want to know. But certainly if you're older, so this is why I keep talking about the abuelitos, people that are older, typically over the age of 70, if they end up on a ventilator, the likelihood of them dying is almost like 80%. And so for people that are older that get sick and need the ventilator because they can't breathe, the likelihood of them dying is pretty high.
We have enough time for about one more question, and then I'm going to be putting a link in the chat box so that you can complete a survey on this STEM career series. But I don't see anything else in the chat box, so I'm going to hand it back over to Danielle.
All right. So I'm really impressed with all these questions. You guys really beat me on this.
I did a good job. I'm really proud of you.
So let me ask, I know you had mentioned the bubonic plague being in Colorado and New Mexico. So let me ask, is there a likelihood that a disease or a plague, a pandemic, I guess, will resurge every so often? Is there a history of that? Is that a pattern that you see?
Yeah, so certainly if you look up flu pandemics, like I told you, every 10 to 12 years we get a pandemic. Sometimes it's bad, like the 1918 flu is the most famous because it killed it actually killed more than half the world's population. And then there's what we call the 1956 flu, which was pretty mild, but was still pandemic. And so, like I said, the last pandemic flu we had was in 2009. And so you may not even remember it because some of you weren't born. And so, or if you were born, you were too little to know about it. But it occurs pretty frequently, almost predictably. And so there's a lot of statistical models that can tell you that this is going to happen with some frequency. And so my job is to try and predict these things so that we're ready, so that whenever it comes, have everything we need, we have the supplies, we have whatever it is, so that we're constantly looking and waiting for these things to happen so that we can take care of you properly.
Okay, great. So last question. We know you're extremely talented and you have so many skills, but is there by any chance a skill or talent that you have that most people don't know? Maybe juggling, candle making?
I'm a really good dancer.
Oh! Excellent.
Awesome. A woman of many talents.
Yes.
That's right.
I want to thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Shelley, and Danielle for interviewing Dr. Shelley today. I'm going to be sharing my screen now just to let all of our participants know that we have future events, future STEM career events, to start exploring what you are really passionate about. And you can even, follow the career path of Dr. Shelley as well. You're going to go to laredolibrary.org and for more information about future events. My contact information is on there as well in case you want to contact me directly. And if you can, please take the survey. I'll put the link in the chat box right now, and you can let us know what you're interested in finding out in the future. So I'll go ahead and end there. But Dr. Barron, do you have any parting words?
Follow your dreams. Don't ever let somebody tell you you can't do something. The only one that should tell you can't do something is yourself. So always just go for it. I think it's always awesome when I think everybody never knows and again, like I told you, the only failure is not trying. So I hope you take that with you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Shelley. So if you can right now, all of our participants, please go to that link that is in the chat box. That's going to help us review your feedback and determine what other programs we're going to have. Once again, this is a NASA at My Library Laredo Public Library collaboration. I'm so thrilled and inspired to have heard all of this from Dr. Shelley. I wish you a great afternoon and a fantastic weekend.